There it goes.
It's official. Episode 125.
Nice. How did it go yesterday, John? I apologize not being here, but I was flying
It
around.
went well, I think.
Good.
Mark was in good voice, and everything went without a hitch. So
Awesome.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Folks, you're tuned into the Rebels Edge. Thank you for joining us. Jared is working the board. My brother Pete Najarian is that Florida or Minnesota, Pete?
Well, it is Minnesota. I flew up here yesterday and it is cold, snowy, and it is the 8th most amount of snow they've had in the history of keeping the records. But they're expecting to see a little bit more coming. So they think it could be a top 5 winter as far as snow. I think we're well over 80 something inches, which
Wow.
in comparison to Mammoth and California is nothing. Those guys don't measure it in inches anymore. They go by feet.
Yeah, true. Same thing with Tahoe. Tahoe's just getting slammed. And the lake, Pete, is up. I think somebody said that the lake is up 10 feet. Tahoe, that is. And that's a lake, folks, that at its deepest point is over a mile deep, I think. But so pretty incredible stuff. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining us today, folks. We appreciate it. We're going to give you our 1-minute macro right now, starting with, of course, this picture of Jay Powell, Jay Powell, as he's known, basically posing by a grave of the regional banks. Now, that might have been too soon, Pete.
Yeah, too soon.
Too soon. Because turns out the regional banks aren't dead. And we're going to hit that in just a few seconds as we go through the top stories of the day. But what do you have as the macro minute, Pete?
Well, John, it is the bounce that we're seeing out of the regional banks, out of the banks themselves. In general, that was really what was pulling the markets down. I mean, you looked over at the financials and they were absolutely, everything was down, but they were definitely the lead dog. And suddenly today, seems like the worries are all gone. We've gotten a nice, pretty nice bounce. We'll talk about what that bounce really means, because people don't always understand that if you go down 50% and return up 50%, you're still down. So we'll talk about that in just a minute as well.
That's right. Well, let's start with the fantastic futures, Pete, because the NASDAQ had a huge jump. And in the first 40 minutes of trading today, those futures, CME and so forth has to be delighted because their volumes have to be pumping with this 20 million shares in the first 40 minutes, Pete, for the QQQ.
Yeah, that's an amazing number. And John, last week we hit almost 70 million when it comes to the volume in the options world. And yesterday we were around 55 million again. So we're hitting some pretty big numbers. We kind of cooled off for a moment or two, but the volumes are back, and they're back in a big way. And it's basically everybody wants a piece of it. You had a great piece, by the way, yesterday talking about pieces of something. Yours was a good piece, though, over there with Charles, talking about exactly what was going on with some of these banks, specifically the regional banks, and some of the different ways in which somebody could play it, maybe even looking for a bounce. That was a great segment yesterday on Fox.
Oh, thank you, Pete. Well, we also spoke just a little bit with Charles, Pete, about Bitcoin, because Charles was talking about gold, and I told him I was at a party with Peter Schiff this past weekend. Yeah, Peter invited me to his 60th birthday party, by the way, when I get back to Puerto Rico. So that should be fun. But Bitcoin was just cruising. And, that's another thing, by the way, that if you want safety when you're trading some of those digital assets, boy, Bitcoin and Ethereum, those options trade at the CME also. So just be aware of that, folks, because instead of trying to get 100-to-1 leverage, you can trade somewhere where your Bitcoin and your capital is safe.
Well, the interesting thing about it all, John, is how about this? So crypto never really wanted a whole lot with regulation. Well, who basically kind of gave crypto a big boost? Well, the regulators, basically, by what they did. So it's a combination of a lot of different things going on, and it's absolutely an incredible run. If you take a look at where Bitcoin was, well, shoot, not too long ago, last week, I think it's up 5,000. So pretty nice run for what's been going on, up about another 11%, hanging around that 25,000 or so. Big recovery. And that's another part of the market. Probably doesn't get talked about enough after some of the selling, but I'll tell you what, this buying has been very rapid, John.
Absolutely. And speaking of rapid, Pete, what about this move in First Republic? We were both talking about, boy, you got to think some of these banks are going to bounce because once the run stops and people look around, First Republic didn't have anywhere near that mismatch of durations that Silicon Valley Bank had. But they were getting a run on the bank and had to get a mini bailout, if you will. But boy, it was up 57% earlier today, Pete. And a bunch of other regional banks like Western Alliance Bancorp, WAL, also up about 40% today.
Yeah, First Republic's an interesting one, John, just because of the fact that, it was only about a week ago the stock was trading 120 something. I think it was 122. Here we are today on this big bounce back, and the stock is around, call it $50. So, a great example of what we were talking about. You get hit to the downside, and you get a big, huge recovery, but that recovery is off of a lower number. So we are seeing some of this very interesting option paper that's been coming into a lot of different regional banks, not just the KRE, but even some of the others. And people have been right. I got to give a shout out, John. Chris Whalen, you and I have known him a long time. That was a guy who yesterday got out there and was kind of talking about a lot of the different areas that he liked within the market, where we looked at specifically in the financials, which is, his territory. But the big move really yesterday, a lot of that, I think, was the news out about Citadel and the position that they decided to take. And that certainly gave a big boost to the stock as well for First Republic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, that one was, I think, Western Alliance Bancorp with Citadel. Yeah,
With
they
Citadel.
took a 5% stake there.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Ken putting his money where his mouth is.
Right. Big move. It is.
What about this one, Pete? I'm here at a board meeting in Arizona, and one of the guys here has a huge a huge production of basically the canola oil. Well, canola, which becomes canola oil. BG was up big this morning because Chevron is collaborating with Covetta and Bunge to produce renewable fuels. And boy, that is an interesting play. But I will say what this gentleman at the board meeting said, Pete. You do that, and all of a sudden, human consumption is competing against basically automobiles and trucks. I don't know if that's a good idea if you're trying to get inflation under control, but they're doing it. And I think it'll push up prices for canola pretty dramatically.
No doubt. And like you're saying, John, that also, it goes directly to demand. And demand, as you pointed out, it's not just for fuel for cars. It's the trucks. It's the diesel. Those guys are moving stuff all over the place. That demand is going to be outrageous, which is exactly why Bunge, at least for now, having a pretty nice go of it. It's back over $100. It hadn't been there for a little while. Heck, last April it was 123. So this has been a little bit of a nice opportunity for that stock to get bought. People are starting to slide it up on the scales. But to your point, when does that become an issue? I don't have the answer, but it is an issue that certainly will have to be addressed at some point, because one is obviously our consumption, and the other is all these vehicles and everything else that's going to be running off of something that's going to be in the green space. Sometimes you got to look a little bit further ahead to see exactly how much pressure is being put on in certain areas. And when it comes to food, I don't know. I dig my food. I don't know if I always have to travel everywhere that I've got to go.
We will keep our eye on it, folks, and we will watch the impact for inflation pressures coming because of this deal. Let's talk about Meta, Pete, because Meta Platforms up 5%. Zuckerberg saying he's going to lay off another 10,000 employees and close out 5,000 open positions that weren't even filled yet. So effectively, that's 15,000, although only 10,000 are presently employed. That's a big deal. That's why the stock's up.
Yeah, people are cheering this one, John. I think for all the right reasons, but there is the other side of the coin, which is, hey, man, these jobs that are out there, whether it's Silicon Valley or wherever they might be, wherever they're headquartered, we are seeing 10%, 10%, 10% just everywhere we look. And obviously, here goes this next 10,000. Plus, there's another 5,000 outside of that, John, that were jobs that they hadn't even filled yet anyway. So they just said, you know what, we'll just stop. They talked about trying to be more efficient. I think that that's exactly what's happening here. I'll tell you what it is good for. It might not be great for the employees, but it certainly is good for the stock. I mean, take a look at Meta, where it started at the beginning of the year to where it is now. It is an absolute juggernaut to the upside. I mean, 124 to 192 today. It might even be higher right now. Just an amazing run to the upside. And I think people are cheering because they see that he has finally, he being Zuckerberg, has actually honed in on this whole idea that you and I were talking about. Hey, man, you can't overspend. Well, he's figured out a way to not overspend as much, and he's able to replace a lot of people.
Yep. And that is exactly reflected in the stock price. Look for Amazon to make a somewhat similar move, Pete.
Yep.
They can't cut people in the warehouses and so forth because that's how they deliver stuff at Amazon, is with all these warehouse locations across the US. That's been a lot of hiring, but I got to believe that they're going to start cutting back on some of the CapEx. And when they do, that stock could be doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Let's talk now about unusual activity. You took mine, Pete. So I had to go with RITM. And this one is sort of like a competitor, I guess, of sorts to Ally, Pete. They do mortgages and other types of lending. Somebody steps in and buys 10,000 of the May 9 calls with the stock at $8.35 or something like that. So it's just out of the money calls. 10,000 of them is a million share equivalent. What I like better, by the way, is buying the at the money calls and selling above that. But since these are May, I don't have to sell right away because the time decay is not nearly as fierce for something that's out a couple months into the future. So for me, Pete, RITM call buying is what my unusual is today.
And what a flip from yesterday, John, just in the general world of our options world, which is yesterday you're seeing a sea of red, but you saw much more of that sea of red even going back to last week, where it just seemed like you looked and everything that was unusual was the put buy. Well, our guys put that as red because they're looking to the downside and looking at green for those calls. Well, we're seeing a hell of a lot more green today. Pinterest is one of those that hit almost immediately today. Sorry, I took that one, John. Didn't mean to, but I'll tell you what a company. When you look at the balance sheet that these guys have got, it's absolutely extraordinary. The free cash flow, 500 million. I mean, everywhere you look, including the PE. Now, it might sound a little bit high, but PE is basically about where it's been in the past. And, that's a little bit over 30. So it's not overly inflated for what they have been able to prove out over time, but they do have a little bit of short interest. What are they buying? They bought a little over 23,000 of the March, which is this coming Friday, the March 26 strike calls. Now, that's a pretty aggressive buy, but not as aggressive as I think you almost need to be, John, because the stock was trading just around that 24, well, just under 25, 24.90, somewhere in that category. I like those 25s that are right there. So to your point, sometimes you want to move down a little bit to get a little bit closer. I think in this case, instead of 16 cents, you come down and you're looking at something that's close to 30 or 40 cents. I kind of like my risk reward of that in potential for this, maybe to make a move to the upside over the next few days. Remember, this do expire on Friday. So that's something you have to have in the back of your mind. But a nice 23,000 lot bid or buying that we're seeing there. That's pretty incredible. I like Pinterest here, John.
2.3 million shares is always worth paying attention to, Pete. So figure 2.3 million shares times 26. That gives you an idea. It's a $52 million potential trade there. Watch it. All right, Pete. I know we got to talk sports and I got to talk rumor just as we're getting into it, which is rumor that Aaron Rodgers is going to sign today with the Jets. Let me just ask you if you think that's true, because a couple of the Jets have already tweeted it and then pulled the tweets down.
I'm going to say yes. And here's why. First of all, it's been rumored for a long time. Second of all, well, Jimmy G has taken his job in Vegas and all these other places. There really aren't a whole lot of landing spots left for him at this point in time. And oh, by the way, sure looks like, John, they've signed two, not one, but looks like two receivers from the Green Bay Packers as well. Lazard coming over, Cobb coming over. I don't know. Sure looks to me like Aaron Rodgers has made up his mind, and so have the Jets on that big flight that they took over there, John. So that's pretty interesting. I think that rumor has a lot of validity to it. I'm going to give you now. How about the Chicago Bears, John? That near and dear to you, as we know, you played for the Bears. You were back in that era with some of the greatest ever, but specifically Sweetness, who was as good as they ever were. How about what this GM is doing with the Bears, John? I find it absolutely fascinating. And I think this guy really, and I mean that. I mean, John, this guy is sitting there with the number one pick in the draft, right? He's sitting up there and he goes, well, let's just see what we're going to do. Well, certainly there's always a sucker there. David Tepper, I hate to say it, but I think the sucker just stepped up. And David Tepper had jumped up, John. They jumped up to the number one spot from number 9. Well, what does that mean? It means the Chicago Bears now get the number 9. Well, they also get number 54, number 61, number 64. They had $100 million in cap space out there. They've already signed 2 linebackers because the Bears are known for defense, although it hasn't been as good. But now you get TJ Edwards over there. You get Tremaine Edmonds over there, who's a beast, John.
Yes, he is.
He's one of my favorite linebackers in football. The kid's only 6'5", 250, runs. He's out there for all those downs, first, second, and third. They don't have to yank him because the guy can run. He's big as hell. So that is a pretty good start, right? I mean, to free agency with the trade. Oh, I didn't even mention to you, they got a first rounder for next year. They got a second rounder for 2025. They also got DJ Moore. So they've got everything that they're looking for. They still got room under the cap, and they got all these picks in front of them. So I give credit to Ryan Poles. This guy's done an amazing job. Do you like the direction they're taking right now, John? Because I love sticking with Fields. Fields was not the problem last year. The problem was, hey, maybe the offensive line needs a little tweaking, or maybe something else needs a little bit. He just got a receiver. That's helpful.
Yep, absolutely, Pete. And what Tepper apparently does not understand is giving the Bears all these picks. Now, we're not in the same division as the Carolina Panthers. I get it. Yep. But you want these guys because with that cap room you're talking about, Pete, with 2 players, you could fill that cap if you're talking about veteran players. On the other hand, when you're talking about draft choices, they have a cap as to how much you can pay, a first-year player. And the contract is for 3 years with an option for 4. That's how it goes. So that means that they could sign, Pete, all of these picks and still be way under the salary cap and still have room to go out and get a couple veterans. Like I say, veterans are going to be much more expensive, not because they're worth it, but because the cap on rookies is what it is.
Yep.
Well, so the Bears could sign all those picks that Pete described, folks, and still have room. So I like this a lot. The Chicago Bears, I might have to start going back to games, Pete.
You're going to have to fly from Puerto Rico. There's worse things in life. Next thing we're going to jump to is still sticking with the NFL, though, John, just because it is that time, man. We talked about this. We talked about, hey, free agency. These guys can't sign anything yet, but they certainly can get into an agreement spot, which is exactly where all these different players that everybody's hearing about, they're in full agreement. They'll sign that document the second they get it tomorrow. But that's just all part of the NFL process and everything. John Lynch, John, you and I talked about him during the season this year when he went out and got McCaffrey. And I said to you, you know what? I think this guy might be the best GM in the entire NFL. And I'll tell you what, I not only still think that, he might be getting even better, John, because he's already gone out and improved the defense even more so than they were. He went out and got Hargrove from Philadelphia, defensive lineman. He's had probably the best 2-year run for a guy his size who plays in the middle the way he does. got 18 and a half sacks in the last 2 years. He's had 124 tackles. This isn't just some guy out there just running around, John. This is probably one of the best defensive tackles right now in the game. And they just picked him up on a team that already has Bosa. They've already got all these other guys on defense that they're keeping. They're under contract, and they just added one more. So I think with that, and then believe it or not, even though I'm not a huge fan of him, he went out and grabbed Sam Darnold for nothing. $4 million, John. So now he's got a quarterback that was a very high draft pick a few years ago out of USC, went to Carolina, didn't pan out at all. But did he have the right coach? Probably not. Now that he comes over with Shanahan, he can be a pretty good backup, John, that costs you almost nothing. And if you do have a situation like the Niners had last year in the playoffs, well, now all of a sudden you've got a second or a third guy in the division or on the team who can step up and actually maybe play. He's already played in the NFL. He's got a bunch of games behind him. I think John Lynch is doing everything right, although they did lose that tackle, McClinchy from Notre Dame. He just got too much money. They went out in New Orleans, not New Orleans, but the old New Orleans coach at Denver grabbed him. I'll tell you what, they will miss him, John, because he was a big, mean son of a gun. But you know what? The Niners just seem to line up those tackles. They've always got him, and the kid that they've got behind McGlinchey is not that bad either.
Right. Well, as far as what's not happening, Pete, I'll get to that in one sec. But Kansas City Chiefs signing Jawan Taylor, a huge offensive lineman, like 6'6", 320, from Jacksonville. Kansas City just signed him for 80 mil. Now, that's not 80 mil on the salary cap. That's 80 mil over 4 years. So I think that's a great move by the Super Bowl champs. I'll tell you who is not impressing me at all, Pete. You talk about John Lynch doing a great job. What about the Carolina Panthers?
Oh.
I mean, you're getting you gave your quarterback whatever, Baltimore Ravens, I meant, Pete, sorry. Baltimore Ravens, you gave him the franchise tag, Lamar Jackson, 32 mil. But what else? What else? I mean, there are teams like Atlanta that are signing, 8 guys out of free agency. The Ravens, So you're going to have a quarterback who's probably not all that happy about not getting the money, just getting a 1-year deal under the franchise tag. And you're not going out and helping him a lot, at least not yet, Pete.
Yeah, they might be trying to do it in the draft, John. They might try to do it a little bit later into free agency, but you're right. And you got to strike while the iron is hot. I mean, these players are signing, and even though the signing date is tomorrow, they're already getting those deals done. They're figuring them all out. They've got all the paperwork. They will sign when it's legal. And I'll tell you what, there are quite a few teams out there right now that are just kind of sitting back and waiting. Not the Bears, though. I'm proud of what your Bears are doing. I love everything about the trading, about all those draft picks. I loved getting a couple of linebackers that they need very bad. They've needed linebackers back there ever since Roquan was given out to Baltimore or whatever, and they did get draft picks out of that. So I think that this GM, I'll tell you what, John Lynch is my number 1, but this guy, he's moving up to number 2 right now, John. He's unbelievable.
Yep, I like it. It's going to be a lot more exciting, and I guarantee, with the Bears moving to a new stadium too, Pete, not this year because it's not built.
Right.
But they're going to be moving out to Arlington Heights. And, I think people will be a lot more excited about the Bears because of these moves.
Yep.
Well, thanks for joining us, folks. You've been listening to Pete Najarian, John Najarian on the Rebel's Edge. Jared's working the boards for us today, and we hope all of you join us tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And until then, bang. Oh, by the way, let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
We do have a free webinar tonight at the close. If you go over to Market Rebellion, you just hit the page, marketrebellion.com. You'll see something that you could click on and join us for a free webinar about trading momentum. Completely free webinar. You even get a copy of the video of it if you go over and sign up now. And it's for beginners. There you go, folks. That was Jared's voice, the voice of God. So please sign up at marketrebellion.com, and we'll see you tonight.
Introducing our new series of intimate in-person trading conferences in some of the greatest cities in America. It's Market Rebellion Live. Next up, this June in Sonoma County, California. Savor some of the finest wines in America while you level up your trading with Pete Najarian, John Najarian, AJ Monty, Ryan Mastro, and Bill Johnson. Sonoma is limited to just 25 seats to ensure every guest gets personal attention, so act now. Tickets are going fast.